The blinking cursor on the screen felt like a metronome counting down the seconds to Leo Vance's financial ruin. At 28 years old, Leo's bank account was a tragic comedy, and his most notable life achievement was managing the Heroic Sub, a moderately successful sandwich shop located in a strip mall off Interstate 95. He possessed a bachelor's degree in philosophy, a piece of paper that had thus far only qualified him to ponder the existential dread of slicing pastrami. He was 2 months behind on rent, his car made a sound like a dying pterodactyl every time he hit the brakes, and he desperately needed a real job. He was currently staring at an application portal for Omnicorp, a massive, monolithic Fortune 500 tech conglomerate. They were hiring for a mid-level regional marketing manager. The requirements were steep: minimum 5 years in corporate marketing, a master's degree preferred, and a proven track record of driving synergistic growth. Leo sighed, rubbing his temples. He had exactly 0 years in corporate marketing. But desperation breeds innovation, and as Leo looked at his barren resume, he decided that honesty was a luxury he simply could not afford. "Okay," Leo muttered to his empty, cramped apartment. "Let's play the game." He deleted his philosophy degree. In its place, he typed, Master of Business Administration, MBA, the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. It felt electric to type. It felt deeply illegal. He kept going. Under work experience, he highlighted the cursor over the Heroic Sub. He couldn't put that. Instead, he wrote, Operations Director, Heroic Global Logistics. He began translating his daily sandwich shop tasks into aggressive corporate jargon. When he convinced the taco truck next door to share a dumpster to cut waste management costs. That became, spearheaded a multi-tiered, cross-functional international merger, reducing overhead by 30% through strategic synergy. Managing 3 high school teenagers who couldn't remember to restock the mayonnaise. That translated to, manage dynamic teams in high-pressure, fast-paced environments, pivoting operational workflows to maximize bandwidth. He reviewed the document. It was a masterpiece of absolute fiction. It was the resume of a titan of industry, a prodigy of commerce. It was also a massive, glittering lie. Closing his eyes, Leo clicked submit. Worst case scenario, their AI scanner rejects it, he told himself, closing his laptop. 3 days later, he got an email. He had an in-person interview on Tuesday at 9 a.m. The Omnicorp headquarters was a terrifying monument to capitalism. It was a spear of blue glass and black steel stabbing into the downtown skyline. When Leo walked through the revolving doors on Tuesday morning, wearing his only suit, a slightly shiny, ill-fitting navy number he'd bought at a thrift store, he immediately felt like a peasant who had wandered into a royal court. However, the atmosphere inside was not one of cold, calculated efficiency. It was absolute pandemonium. People in $1,000 suits were sprinting across the marble lobby. Phones were ringing off the hook. A woman dropped a stack of papers, burst into tears, and left them on the floor. Leo approached the massive, curved reception desk, where a half-dozen receptionists were frantically typing and yelling into headsets. "Excuse me," Leo said to a frazzled-looking receptionist. "I'm here for an interview." "Leo Vance." "Vance." The receptionist's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "Wait, Vance. Are you sure?" "Pretty sure," Leo said, offering a weak smile. The receptionist slammed her hand onto a red button on her phone. "Chloe. Chloe, get down here. He's here. Vance is here." Before Leo could ask if this was standard procedure for mid-level marketing applicants, the elevator doors pinged open, and a young woman, presumably Chloe from HR, sprinted out. She looked entirely breathless, holding an iPad like a shield. "Mr. Vance." Chloe gasped, practically sliding to a halt in front of him. "Thank God you're here. We are so sorry for the chaos. I know your flight from Silicon Valley just landed, We didn't expect you for another hour. My flight. Leo blinked. He had taken the D train. We are in full crisis mode, Chloe said, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward a set of private, gold-plated elevators. You've heard the news, obviously. Richard resigned at 3 a.m. Total meltdown. The stock is tanking as we speak. The board has been sequestered in the penthouse since dawn. They are ready for you. Leo's brain short-circuited. Richard. The board? Penthouse. Listen, Chloe, I think there's been a... No time for modesty, Mr. Vance, Chloe interrupted as the elevator doors closed, rocketing them upward at a stomach-churning speed. I know headhunting firm warned us you were eccentric, but you are literally the only candidate who can save us right now. Your portfolio is legendary. The board is anxious. Leo stared at his reflection in the polished brass doors. Portfolio. Legendary. The horrific realization washed over him like a bucket of ice water. There had been a mix-up. They didn't think he was Leo Vance, the sandwich artist applying for marketing. They thought he was some other Vance. An executive Vance. A savior Vance. He opened his mouth to correct her, to confess the truth and run out of the building before he was arrested for corporate espionage. But then, the elevator chimed. Level 80. The door slid open to reveal a massive, soundproofed lobby overlooking the entire city. Chloe pushed him forward toward a set of imposing mahogany double doors. Good luck, Mr. Vance. They're waiting. She opened the doors, shoved him inside, and pulled them shut behind him with a heavy thud. The boardroom was the size of a tennis court. At the center sat a long table carved from a single slab of dark wood. Around it sat 12 individuals who looked like they controlled the world's oil supply. They were older, stern, and radiated an aura of immense, terrifying wealth. At the head of the table sat Arthur Sterling, the chairman of the board, a man with silver hair and eyes like chips of flint. The room went dead silent as Leo stumbled in. Arthur Sterling steepled his fingers, assessing Leo from head to toe, his gaze lingering on the cheap thrift store suit. Mr. Vance, Sterling's voice boomed, deep and resonant. You're younger than I anticipated. And your attire is, aggressively casual for a Fortune 500 boardroom. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Run, his brain screamed. Confess and run. But as Leo looked at the panoramic view of the city behind them, he thought about his dying car. He thought about his empty bank account. He thought about the fact that he was already standing in the room. He took a deep breath, channeled every corporate buzzword he had ever heard on late-night business podcasts, and walked confidently to the empty leather chair at the opposite end of the table. I find that overly formal attire restricts cognitive bandwidth, Arthur, Leo said smoothly, leaning back in the chair. He didn't know if he was allowed to call the chairman by his first name, but he rolled with it. We are in the business of disruption, aren't we? It's hard to disrupt an industry when you're suffocating in a silk tie. A murmur rippled through the board members. A woman with sharp cheekbones and wire-rimmed glasses leaned forward. A bold opening statement. But let's cut to the chase, Vance. Omnicorp is bleeding. Our Q3 projections are a disaster, our legacy infrastructure is obsolete, and Richard's sudden departure has spooked the shareholders. How do you propose we stop the bleeding? Leo had absolutely no idea what Q3 projections were. He stared at the woman. He needed to sound smart. He needed to sound visionary. He thought about the heroic sub. What did he do when the meat slicer broke and the lunch rush was approaching? You're looking at the blood, but you're ignoring the wound, Leo said, pitching his voice low and serious. The room leaned in. Elaborate, Sterling commanded. You're talking about legacy infrastructure and projections, Leo continued, waving his hand dismissively. Those are symptoms. The root cause is a lack of synergistic agility. We are bottlenecking our own core competencies because we are afraid to pivot. Pivot to what? An older man scoffed. Leo slammed his hand flat on the mahogany table. A holistic paradigm shift. He declared, having absolutely no clue what that meant. We are operating in silos. Marketing isn't talking to R&D. Logistics is alienated. I've seen this before in global logistics. He was leaning into his resume line now. When I facilitated the heroic global merger, we had two distinct, hostile entities. You know how I solved it? How? Asked the sharp-cheeked woman, her pen poised over a notepad. I forced them into the same parking lot, Leo said. He was literally talking about the taco truck and the sandwich shop. I made them share a literal and metaphorical space. We consolidated our waste streams, which cut overhead by 30% immediately. We stopped competing for the local demographic and started offering a unified, cross-platform consumer experience. If they wanted a sandwich, we had it. If they wanted a taco, we integrated it. Silence fell over the room. Leo sweat profusely under his cheap suit. He had just talked about tacos in a Fortune 500 board meeting. He was going to jail. Suddenly, Arthur Sterling let out a low bark of laughter. Brilliant, Sterling whispered. Absolutely brilliant. Leo blinked. Excuse me. A unified consumer experience, Sterling repeated, looking at the board. He's using the taco as a metaphor for our mobile gaming division, and the sandwich as our hardware division. We've been treating them as competitors instead of an ecosystem. He's talking about forced integration. He's calling us out on our internal tribalism. It's aggressive, the sharp-cheeked woman said, nodding slowly. It's exactly the kind of ruthless, out-of-the-box thinking Richard lacked. He's talking about burning down the silos. Exactly, Leo said quickly, trying to mask his shock. Burn down the silos. Synergize the tacos. For the next 2 hours, the board threw complex financial and operational problems at Leo. Every time, Leo deflected by using a vague philosophy concept or a metaphor about food service logistics. When asked about supply chain bottlenecks in Southeast Asia, Leo talked about the importance of pre-slicing the tomatoes before the lunch rush to maximize frontline efficiency. The board interpreted this as a genius strategy to decentralize manufacturing nodes and stockpile microchips. By hour 3, they were looking at him not as a candidate, but as a messiah. Arthur Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket. Mr. Vance, I'll admit, when the headhunters brought us your file, I was skeptical. Your Wharton background is impressive, of course, but your methods, they are unorthodox. Highly disruptive. Disruption is the engine of progress, Arthur, Leo said, quoting a bumper sticker he had seen on his way to the subway. Indeed, Sterling said. He looked around the table. The board members nodded in unison. Sterling turned his piercing gaze back to Leo. Omnicorp doesn't have time for a prolonged transition. The markets open in an hour, and we need to announce a new captain at the helm. We'd like to formally offer you the position of Chief Executive Officer. Leo's breath caught in his throat. He dug his fingernails into his palms to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. I see. The base salary is $15 million annually, with an additional $20 million in performance-vested stock options, Sterling continued, sliding a thick folder across the table. Plus a $5 million signing bonus, wired upon signature today. Can you start immediately? Leo looked at the folder. He thought about the overdue rent, the dying car, and the smell of old pastrami. He looked at the billionaires waiting with bated breath for the verdict of a man who, yesterday, had accidentally locked himself in a walk-in freezer. Leo reached into his pocket, pulled out a cheap ballpoint pen he'd stolen from a bank, and clicked it. Arthur, Leo said, pulling the contract toward him with a practiced, stoic calm. Let's synergize. The CEO suite of Omnicorp was less of an office and more of an imperial throne room suspended 80 stories above the city. It featured wraparound floor-to-ceiling windows, a private bathroom lined in imported Italian marble, and a desk carved from a single slab of reclaimed redwood that was roughly the size of a minivan. Leo Vance sat behind it, vibrating with a mixture of raw caffeine and unadulterated terror. It was day 4. The $5 million signing bonus had cleared his checking account that morning. When Leo had opened his banking app on his cracked smartphone, the string of zeros had caused him to physically dry heave into his platinum-plated wastebasket. He was richer than he had ever dreamed, and he had absolutely no idea what he was doing. His executive assistant, a hyper-efficient man named David who spoke in rapid-fire corporate acronyms, marched into the office carrying a stack of leather-bound dossiers. "Morning, Mr. Vance," David said crisply, setting the dossiers on the redwood desk. "I've compiled the preliminary reports for the morning sync. We need your signature on the Q4 EBITDA projections, the SEC compliance waivers for the European subsidiary, and the CapEx budget approvals for the new Silicon Valley campus. Also, legal needs to know if you want to proceed with the aggressive litigation strategy against our microchip suppliers or pivot to arbitration." Leo stared at the stack of paper. To him, the words EBITDA and CapEx sounded like alien diseases. He felt a cold sweat prickle the back of his neck. "David," Leo said, keeping his voice a low, gravelly whisper. He had learned over the past 3 days that if you spoke softly and vaguely, highly paid executives assumed you were just deep in thought. "Tell me, David. What do you think of the CapEx budget?" David blinked, clearly taken aback. "Me, sir? I mean, I'm just your assistant. It's not my place to evaluate capital expenditures." "Nonsense," Leo interrupted, standing up and walking to the massive windows. He clasped his hands behind his back, staring out at the smog-choked skyline. "Leadership isn't about hoarding decisions, David. It's about cultivating the minds around you. I want to know what the boots on the ground think. Read the room for me." "Well," David stammered, his chest puffing out slightly with unexpected pride. "I think the Silicon Valley campus is a vanity project inherited from Richard. It's an unnecessary drain on liquidity when we should be fortifying our R&D pipeline." Leo turned around and pointed a finger gun at David. Boom. "Exactly. You see the board, David. You see the whole board. Deny the CapEx budget. Tell them Vance says we are fortifying the pipeline." "Yes, sir." David practically beamed, gathering the folders. "And the EBITDA projections? Have the finance team run them again," Leo said smoothly. "Tell them they lack vision. They need to look beyond the numbers and find the narrative." As David hurried out of the office, fueled by the delusion that his new boss was a philosophical genius, Leo collapsed back into his leather chair. The art of delegation, he thought. If I never actually do anything, I can never do anything wrong. His relief was short-lived. 30 minutes later, the heavy oak doors swung open without a knock. In walked Sarah Jenkins, Omnicorp's chief financial officer. If Leo was a master of improvisation, Sarah was a master of surgical precision. She possessed 2 Ivy League degrees, a mind like a steel trap, and a terrifyingly sharp pantsuit. It was widely known in the building that Sarah had expected to be named CEO after Richard's departure. She looked at Leo not as a visionary, but as an annoying, unauthorized organism that had infected her company. "Vance," Sarah said, dropping a thick tablet onto his desk. "We have a problem. Your new Fortify the Pipeline directive just panicked the board. You froze a $200 million real estate development without a backup proposal. What exactly is your strategy here?" Leo swallowed hard. He needed a distraction. He needed to look like a man playing a game several levels above her comprehension. He gestured to the glass coffee table to his left. Over the weekend, using his first paycheck, Leo had bought a few items to make his office look suitably intimidating. Among them was a stunningly crafted, antique Xianqi board Chinese chess. He had spent hours in his 20s playing it with an old man at a park near his apartment, and while he was no grandmaster, he understood the brutal, calculated flow of the game. "Sit down, Sarah," Leo said, walking over to the board. Sarah narrowed her eyes but slowly took a seat on the white leather sofa. "I didn't come here to relax, Leo. I came for numbers. The shareholders want to know why we are sitting on cash instead of expanding." Leo picked up one of the wooden pieces, the cannon. He rolled it between his fingers. "You play?" he asked softly. "I don't have time for board games," she snapped. "It's not a game, it's an ecosystem," Leo corrected, channeling his inner philosopher king. "In Western chess, pieces march across an open board to slaughter each other. But Xianqi is different. Look here." He pointed to the empty space dividing the two sides of the board. "The river. It divides the territories. And look at this piece, the cannon." Sarah crossed her arms. "Fascinating. Can we get back to the $200 million? The cannon," Leo continued, ignoring her, "is one of the most powerful pieces on the board. But it has a unique rule. It cannot capture an enemy piece directly. It must jump over another piece of screen to strike its target." He placed the cannon down with a sharp clack. Leo leaned forward, looking directly into Sarah's eyes. "You're asking me to fire blindly across the river, Sarah. You want me to build a campus just because we have the capital. But I am positioning my pieces. We don't cross the river until the enemy's formations are exposed. We sit on the cash to act as our screen. When the market shifts and our cannon will strike with absolute, devastating precision. Building a campus now is just moving pawns." Sarah stared at him. For a long, agonizing 10 seconds, the only sound in the room was the hum of the air conditioning. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. He had just compared a Fortune 500 real estate portfolio to a wooden board game. He braced himself to be fired. Slowly, the tension in Sarah's jaw relaxed. A look of cautious realization washed over her face. "A hostile acquisition," Sarah whispered. Leo blinked. "Excuse me." "You're stockpiling liquidity," she said, her voice dropping lower, her eyes widening as she connected dots that Leo didn't even know existed. "You froze the real estate capital because you're planning a major acquisition. You're waiting for a competitor to show weakness to cross the river, and then you're going to use our cash reserves to initiate a hostile takeover. You're using the stalled campus project as a smokescreen to hide our true purchasing power from the SEC." Leo kept his face entirely blank. "I wouldn't phrase it exactly like that to the shareholders, Sarah." "My God," she muttered, standing up. "It's incredibly aggressive. If the board finds out you're hiding intentions of a hostile takeover, it's a massive gamble. But if it pays off..." She looked at Leo with a newfound, begrudging respect. "You really are a shark, Vance." "Just setting the board, Sarah," Leo said, offering a cool smile. As she hurried out of the office to revise her financial models, Leo collapsed onto the sofa, exhaling a breath he felt like he'd been holding for a week. He looked at the wooden cannon piece. Thank God for old men in public parks, he thought. Leo's strategy of extreme delegation and vague metaphors worked perfectly for the first month. He empowered his department heads to such an extreme degree that Omnicorp practically ran itself. Productivity actually increased because the micromanaging toxic culture of the previous CEO was gone. The employees loved Leo. They thought his hands-off approach was a sign of absolute trust. But a CEO cannot hide forever. Eventually, paper needs to be signed, and definitive choices must be made. The crisis arrived on a rainy Tuesday. Omnicorp's tech division had an expiring option to acquire one of three struggling start UPS. If they didn't execute an acquisition by 5 p.m., they would lose millions in tax incentives. The board demanded a decision from their visionary leader. Leo sat in the main conference room, surrounded by 50 anxious executives. 3 presentation boards were set up, displaying complex algorithms, user acquisition costs, and market penetration charts for the 3 start UPS. So, Mr. Vance, the head of tech acquisitions said, gesturing to the charts. Option A is a B2B cloud storage solution with a solid, if unexciting, revenue stream. Option B is a decentralized crypto ledger that carries high risk but high reward. Option C is, well, Option C is Neon Toad Studios. They make mobile games. They are practically bankrupt, their user base is plummeting, and frankly, we only included them as a tax write-off option. Leo stared at the boards. The numbers blurred together. He had no idea what a B2B cloud storage solution was, and crypto sounded like fake internet money. He looked at option C. The logo for Neon Toad Studios was a pixelated, slightly cross-eyed amphibian wearing sunglasses. It looked ridiculous. It looked fun. It reminded Leo of the old arcade cabinets he used to play in the back of the sandwich shop when business was slow. What would a visionary do? Leo asked himself. A visionary disrupts. We're acquiring Neon Toad, Leo announced, his voice echoing in the silent room. The head of tech acquisitions choked on his coffee. Sir? Neon Toad. They make a game about frogs sorting garbage. It's a financial black hole. Option A is a guaranteed safe harbor. Safe harbors are where ships go to rot, Leo replied instantly, pulling another platitude from the ether. Omnicorp is a battleship. We belong in the storm. Option A is boring. Option B is a fad. Neon Toad has cultural resonance. It has soul. It has $3 million in debt, Sarah pointed out from the back of the room, her eyes narrowed. Debt is just an unfulfilled promise, Leo countered smoothly, having no idea what that meant. Buy the Toad. Give them whatever funding they need to finish their next project. And don't micromanage them. Let the creatives create. He stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked out of the room. The executives sat in stunned silence. For 2 weeks, it looked like Leo had made a fatal error. The financial press caught wind of the acquisition and tore Omnicorp apart. Headlines called Leo a madman and the sandwich artist of Wall Street, a title that made Leo panic, until he realized they meant it as a metaphor for his messy corporate restructuring. The stock dipped. But Leo hadn't realized that Neon Toad Studios was sitting on a completed, unreleased game that they couldn't afford to market. With Omnicorp's massive financial backing and Leo's directive to let them do whatever they wanted, the studio launched Neon Toad, Galaxy Hopper. It was an overnight, global phenomenon. It was highly addictive, perfectly Monetized, and went viral on every social media platform on Earth. Within 72 hours, the game generated more revenue than Omnicorp's entire hardware division had in a quarter. The stock didn't just recover, it skyrocketed to an all-time high. Overnight, Leo was vindicated. Financial magazines hailed him as an eccentric savant who saw value where others saw trash. He was invited to speak at tech summits. His face was plastered on billboards. He had failed upwards with such spectacular velocity that he was practically in orbit. But as Leo celebrated in his penthouse office, popping open a bottle of vintage champagne he couldn't pronounce, the shadow of his lie was growing. Sarah Jenkins was not a woman who believed in magic, and she certainly didn't believe in sandwich shop philosophers who accidentally made billions. She sat in her dimly lit office, staring at Leo Vance's personnel file. The story didn't add up. The Wharton degree was practically unverified. The university registrar had been conveniently updating their digital records when HR called to check. The heroic global logistics merger left zero footprint in any financial database. She picked up her desk phone and dialed a private number. "Marcus," Sarah said when the line connected. Marcus was a corporate investigator, a man who specialized in digging up the skeletons buried deep in executive closets. "I have a job for you. Top priority. I need you to look into Leo Vance. The new golden boy." Marcus chuckled on the other end of the line. "The guy who just made your company billions off a frog game? Why? You think he's insider trading?" "I think he's a ghost," Sarah replied, her voice cold. "I want his college transcripts. I want his tax returns. I want to know what heroic global logistics actually is. Leave no stone unturned. If he has a secret, I want it on my desk by the end of the month." "Consider it done," Marcus said. Sarah hung up the phone and looked out her window toward the CEO's penthouse suite, her eyes hard. Leo's grand illusion was holding up against the chaotic winds of the corporate world, but it was built on a foundation of sand. And Sarah Jenkins was about to summon a hurricane. The digital stock ticker that wrapped around the perimeter of the OmniCorp penthouse was bleeding. Usually a soothing cascade of neon green, it was now flashing a violent, aggressive red. It was day 82 of Leo Vance's accidental reign as CEO, and the illusion was finally shattering. David, Leo's normally unflappable executive assistant, burst into the office without knocking. His tie was askew, his hair was a mess, and he was clutching a tablet like it was a live grenade. "Mr. Vance, it's a bloodbath," David gasped, practically hyperventilating. "Apex Dynamics just filed a 13D. They've quietly acquired a 9% stake in our voting shares, and Victor Thorne just launched a massive, unsolicited tender offer directly to the shareholders. It's a hostile takeover. They're offering a 40% premium on the current share price." Leo stared blankly. He understood precisely none of the financial mechanics David had just described, but he understood the panic in the man's eyes. He knew what a hostile takeover was from watching 80s movies. It meant the bad guys were storming the castle. "Victor Thorne?" Leo asked, keeping his voice carefully neutral. "The CEO of Apex Dynamics," David practically sobbed. "The corporate raider. He's notorious, sir. If he gets board control, he's going to gut OmniCorp. He'll sell off the hardware division, liquidate the real estate, and fire 50,000 people to artificially pump his own stock. The board has called an emergency session in 5 minutes. They are demanding you deploy the Cannon strategy." Leo swallowed hard. The Cannon strategy. The brilliant, aggressive financial maneuver he had supposedly been planning since his second week, which was actually just him describing a wooden piece on a Chinese chessboard to avoid making a real estate decision. "Right," Leo said, standing up and adjusting his bespoke Italian suit, a far cry from the thrift store disaster he had worn to his interview. "Tell the board I am on my way. Let's go slay a dragon, David." As he walked down the long, glass-walled corridor toward the executive boardroom, Leo felt a profound sense of finality. He had survived for 3 months on sheer luck, aggressive delegation, and the viral success of a mobile game about a frog. But he couldn't delegate a hostile takeover. He couldn't fake his way through a multi-billion-dollar corporate defense. The ride was over. The atmosphere in the boardroom was toxic. The 12 members of the board of directors were shouting over one another. Arthur Sterling, the chairman, looked like he was on the verge of a massive cardiac event. "Quiet!" Sterling roared as Leo entered the room. The room fell into a tense, vibrating silence. Sterling locked eyes with Leo. "Vance. The wolf is at the door. Thorne has secured a massive line of credit from a consortium of predatory banks. We need a poison pill defense, or we need to counter-acquire. You've been hoarding 200 million in liquid capital. It's time to fire the cannon." Leo walked slowly to his seat at the head of the table. He looked at the faces of the billionaires staring at him, waiting for salvation. He opened his mouth to speak, to perhaps string together a sentence about synergistic blockade paradigms, when the heavy mahogany doors violently swung open. Sarah Jenkins, the chief financial officer, marched into the room. She was not carrying her usual sleek tablet. She was carrying a thick, battered manila envelope. She looked entirely too calm for a woman whose company was being actively dismantled. "There will be no cannon, Arthur," Sarah announced, her voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "Because there is no cannon. There is no strategy. And, as it turns out, there is no Leo Vance. At least, not the one we hired." Sterling frowned deeply. "Sarah, this is not the time for internal politics. We are under attack." "We've been under attack for 82 days, Sarah countered, walking directly to the center of the table. She slammed the manila envelope down with a resounding smack. "I hired a private investigator to look into our visionary CEO. The man who orchestrated the heroic global logistics merger." She opened the envelope and slid a glossy 8x10 photograph down the polished wood. It stopped right in front of Arthur Sterling. Sterling picked it up. He squinted. "What is this? Is this Vance wearing a plastic apron?" "That, Arthur," Sarah said with venomous satisfaction, "is Leo Vance. 3 months ago. Working his shift at the Heroic Sub, a sandwich shop in a strip mall off Interstate 95. He is not a logistics mastermind. He is a line cook." The boardroom erupted. "He has no MBA from Wharton," Sarah continued, raising her voice over the chaos. "He has a bachelor's degree in philosophy. He has never orchestrated a merger. He didn't know what a Q3 projection was. He bought Neon Toad Studios because he liked the picture of the frog. We handed the keys to a $50 billion empire to a man whose greatest professional achievement was managing a high school kid named Tyler who chronically forgot to restock the mayonnaise." The board members stared at Leo in absolute horror. The sharp-cheeked woman who had praised his disruptive methods looked like she was going to be sick. "Is this true?" Sterling whispered, his voice trembling with a terrifying rage. "Are you a sandwich artist?" Leo looked at the photograph. It was a good picture, actually. He looked happy. He looked down at his expensive suit, then back up at the board. The jig was up. The exhaustion of lying for 3 months suddenly evaporated, replaced by a strange, liberating calm. "I prefer the term operations director of culinary logistics," Leo said plainly. "But yes. It's true. All of it." "Call security," a board member shrieked. "Call the SEC. Call the FBI. This is unprecedented fraud." "Wait," a smooth, arrogant voice interrupted from the doorway. Everyone turned. Standing in the entrance, flanked by 3 terrifyingly expensive-looking corporate lawyers, was Victor Thorne. He was a tall man with slicked back hair, wearing a sharkskin suit and a smile that looked like an open razor. He had bypassed security, using his new status as a major shareholder to walk right into the lion's den. "Please, don't call the authorities just yet," Thorne purred, stepping into the room. "I want to savor this." "A sandwich maker? Really, Arthur? This is who you put up against me?" Thorne walked slowly around the table, radiating smug superiority. "I came here to deliver my final terms personally. You have 24 hours to recommend my tender offer to the shareholders, or I initiate a proxy fight that will drag your reputations through the mud. And now." Thorne laughed, a cold, barking sound. "Now I find out your CEO is a fraud. The press is going to have a field day. Omnicorp is dead. I'm going to buy it for pennies, strip it for parts, and turn this boardroom into a high-end gym." The board was paralyzed. Sarah looked victorious, but also vaguely horrified at the reality of Thorne actually destroying the company she loved. Leo sat quietly. He watched Victor Thorn gloat. He looked at the panicked billionaires. Suddenly, Leo stood up. He didn't look like a terrified imposter anymore. He took off his bespoke suit jacket and threw it over the back of his chair. He reached up, loosened his silk tie, and unbuttoned his collar. He rolled up his sleeves. "You know, Victor," Leo said, his voice completely devoid of the hushed, fake executive tone he had used for 3 months. He sounded like a guy from the neighborhood. "You remind me of this guy named Gary." Thorn stopped pacing and frowned. "Who?" "Gary," Leo repeated, walking slowly toward Thorn. "Gary used to come into my shop every Tuesday at 12:15 p.m. Gary drove a leased BMW he couldn't afford, wore a Bluetooth earpiece, and always complained that we didn't put enough meat on his Italian sub." "What is this idiot talking about?" Thorn sneered, looking at Arthur Sterling. "Have him removed." Leo kept walking until he was standing uncomfortably close to Thorn. Thorn was taller, but Leo had spent 5 years de-escalating drunk, angry, and unhinged customers at 2 in the morning. He knew how to hold his ground. "Gary liked to yell," Leo continued, his eyes locked onto Thorn's. "He liked to make a scene in front of the other customers. He thought if he yelled loud enough, he'd get free extra salami. He tried to bully the teenagers working the register. But you know what the secret about Gary was, Victor?" Thorn glared, involuntarily stepping back from Leo's intense proximity. "I don't care about your deli stories, you fraud." "The secret," Leo whispered fiercely, "was that Gary was broke. He yelled because he was powerless everywhere else in his life. He was leveraged to the gills. Just like you." Thorn's eye twitched. "Excuse me." Leo turned to the board. "David briefed me on your 13D filing on the walk over here. You secured a massive line of credit from a consortium of banks to make this tender offer. It's a highly leveraged buyout. You're using debt to buy us, planning to pay it off by selling our assets." Leo turned back to Thorn, stepping into his personal space again. "But here's the thing, Gary. I mean, Victor. You overplayed your hand. You think you're staring down a bunch of scared billionaires. But you're staring down a guy who has literally nothing to lose. I'm already fired. I'm probably going to jail. Which means I don't care about the rules anymore." Leo pointed a finger directly at Thorn's chest. "You want to play hostile? Let's play. You think I've been sitting on $200 million doing nothing? I authorized the purchase of Neon Toad Studios, which gave us access to the data of 80 million daily active users. Do you know what our engineers found in the backend analytics of our new cloud computing division?" Leo was entirely making this up. He was pulling words out of thin air, weaving the ultimate sandwich shop bluff. "We found that Apex Dynamics has been illegally routing your offshore tax liabilities through our legacy servers," Leo lied flawlessly, his voice rising in righteous fury. "I have a dossier sitting in my desk that proves your entire company is a house of cards built on securities fraud. If you don't withdraw your tender offer right now, in 5 minutes, I am going to release that data to the SEC, the DOJ, and the Wall Street Journal." Thorn blanched. "You're bluffing. That's impossible." "Am I?" Leo roared, slamming his hand on the mahogany table so hard the water glasses rattled. "I'm a lunatic who faked his way into running a Fortune 500 company. I bought a frog game because I liked the colors. Do you really want to play a game of chicken with a man who has absolutely zero regard for corporate sanity?" Leo stepped closer, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You cross the river, Victor, and my cannon is going to blow your entire life into the stratosphere. I will tank Omnicorp stock to zero just to watch Apex Dynamics burn with it. I will kamikaze this entire building. Withdraw the bid. Now." The boardroom was dead silent. The only sound was Thorn's ragged breathing. Thorn looked at Leo's wild, unblinking eyes. He looked at the board, who were staring at Leo with a mixture of absolute terror and profound awe. Thorne was a bully, and bullies operate on the assumption of rational fear. Leo was projecting irrational, suicidal confidence. Thorne swallowed hard. The color drained from his face. He looked at his lawyers, who suddenly seemed very interested in their shoes. "This isn't over," Thorne whispered. He turned on his heel and practically sprinted out of the boardroom, his lawyers trailing frantically behind him. For a full minute after the doors swung shut, nobody moved. Then, the digital stock ticker above them chimed. Apex Dynamics had officially withdrawn their SEC filings. The hostile takeover was aborted. Instantly, the algorithmic trading bots reacted. The red numbers flashed green. Omnicorp's stock shot up 12% in a matter of seconds. Leo slowly let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for a decade. He picked up his suit jacket, slung it over his shoulder, and looked at Arthur Sterling. "Well," Leo said, his voice shaking slightly. "I'll just go pack up my office." "Sit down, Mr. Vance," Sterling commanded. His voice was quiet, but it carried absolute authority. Leo froze, then slowly sank back into his chair. Sterling looked at the photograph of Leo in the plastic apron. He looked at the skyrocketing green numbers on the stock ticker. He looked at Sarah Jenkins, who was staring at Leo like he was a terrifying alien species. "What you did to get into this room," Sterling began, steepling his fingers, "is a crime. It is a massive, unforgivable breach of ethics. You have no degree. You have no experience. You are a walking, talking liability." Leo nodded. "I know. However," Sterling continued, a faint, almost invisible smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "In the last 10 minutes, you saved this company from total annihilation. You read Victor Thorne like a cheap paperback book. You utilized a level of psychological warfare that I haven't seen since the hostile takeovers of the 1980s. You made us $3 billion in market cap by yelling about a man named Gary." Sterling looked around the table. "We are in the business of results. And the results are undeniable." Sarah stood up, outraged. "Arthur, you cannot be serious. You can't let him stay. He's a fraud. And if we fire him," Sterling countered smoothly, "Victor Thorne will realize it was a bluff. The stock will tank. The shareholders will crucify us for hiring him in the first place. No. We cannot fire him. But we also cannot let him actually run the company." Sterling turned his gaze to Sarah. "Sarah, you are the smartest operational mind in this building. From this moment forward, you are the chief operating officer. You have ultimate, unchecked veto power over every financial, logistical, and structural decision Omnicorp makes. You will run the company." Sarah blinked, the outrage slowly morphing into calculating realization. "And Vance?" "Mr. Vance," Sterling said, looking at Leo. "You will remain the chief executive officer. You will be the face of Omnicorp. You will give speeches about disruption and synergy. You will attend tech summits. You will smile for the cameras, and you will do exactly what Sarah tells you to do behind closed doors. You are no longer the operator. You are the mascot." Leo looked at Sarah. She was already mentally calculating the restructuring of the executive tier. She looked back at him, a grudging truce forming in her eyes. "A mascot," Leo repeated. He thought about the $15 million salary. He thought about his dying car, which he had already replaced with a modest, reliable sedan. He thought about never having to slice pastrami again. "I can be a very synergistic mascot, Arthur," Leo said, offering a faint smile. "Excellent," Sterling said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. Meeting adjourned. "And Vance?" Leo paused. "Yes, Arthur. Next time you order lunch for the executive suite, Sterling said dryly. Make sure they don't forget the mayonnaise.